back to the channel. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and today we'll be continuing this series in which I analyze every faction in Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. We did the tribal faction last video, and I would highly recommend you go and check out that video first, as this video will reference that one to some extent. Insert the typical like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff. You've heard it 100 times, and I'm not going to repeat it 100 more. So, without further ado, let's get into the analysis of the Farmer faction, the topic of today's video. The Farmer faction is the second faction you will unlock in your journey throughout tabs. As you can see here, there is a notable lack of any really big unit like the Mammoth in the Lost faction. And this faction is much more spread out in method and price than the tribal faction, because the tribal faction was very, very straightforward in what it did. The Farmer faction is a little more gimmicky and can be quite hard to use if you do not know what you are doing. So that's why there are videos like this one that I'm presenting to you right now to help you. This faction is probably more balanced overall than the tribal faction. It's a little bit less extreme in terms of what it does. And as I mentioned, the tribal faction is very swarmy. This faction is much more balanced, I'll say. The first unit we will be covering is the Halfling. Cost of 50, so the cheapest I've presented thus far. Their hands are extra grippy, they can hold on to targets and weigh them down. And they have a small leap that they perform, which will often let them get the first attack in. They have quite low HP and damage, but are very, very cheap. So they're very often used as cannon fodder and to bait targets. Their small size also makes them tough to hit, so if you're baiting ranged units, they're a very, very good choice. So for the pros, cheap, spammable, and very good at distracting and stalling, as I mentioned. Cons, kind of similar to the Clubber from the tribal faction, they're very weak to area attacks, and they have lowish overall stats. Next we have the Farmer. They have a cost of 80, matching the Protector in the tribal faction, and they have a Pitchfork. Quite cheap, and their weapons actually very accurate and very rapid fire, I'll say, very short cooldown. Since tabs does have friendly fire, the increased accuracy is very helpful in making sure you can use large groups without risking friendly fire. They are the poor person's infantry, if you will, often used to just deal damage and swarm targets when using a somewhat low budget. Pros, cheap and efficient with their low friendly fire. Cons, very, very low HP. About 14.3% less than the Clubber on average. Tabs does have slight variation on any given unit, so it's just an average. Area of effect will demolish farmers. Somewhat akin to Halflings or Clubbers, but even more so because you can pack them so tightly with their efficient weapons. Next we have the Hay Baler. People so poor they resort to using hay bales, and totally accurately, it's somehow better than actual armor. They have a cost of 140, and they have a stick. Not even kidding, it's just literally a stick they use, which has a very, very, very fast attack rate. It's probably the fastest I've seen for a melee weapon. Their hay bale armor lets them take numerous amounts of ranged attacks, assuming it doesn't hit the arm, head, or exposed legs. So they can be used to really easily tank for ranged attackers. They do have very low damage despite the attack rate. So for an armored unit, they are very, very cheap. The Cactus, for example, is 400, while the Blunderbuss in the Pirate faction is, I think, 160. I will be reviewing that in a later video. Now these guys, as mentioned, are excellent against ranged attackers. So for instance, the Spear Thrower from the tribal faction, or the Stoner, this guy will do really well. However, the hay bales do not protect against melee or splash attacks, like area of effect. They also don't block against certain projectiles like the Bone Mage's attack from the Tribal faction, and again they won't protect from melee, and the unit themselves has very low health. Next we have the Potion Seller, cost of 340, which is a little weird, but totally accurate, who cares? They have the ability to throw potions, which I think is just concentrated alcohol. For their costs, they have quite low health, somewhere between a farmer and a clubber. And their attacks have a drunk-ish effect, this is why I think it's just alcohol in an area. Drunk units will stumble, miss attacks, walk around, and trip over their own toes somehow. It's not uncommon for one to just accidentally walk off the edge of a map. So it's very good for suppressing enemies, especially with the area effect for only 340. However, as mentioned, low health, and as mentioned, Tabs has friendly fire. This unit can accidentally hit friendly units. And because it's an area, if it targets a very close by unit, say a farmer about to stab him in the face, he can accidentally hit himself, which will reduce his accuracy. The potions do deal a little damage, but it is very, very, very little, and really should not be relied to take out anything with more health than a halfling. Next we have the Harvester. This is why I said that there was much more variation in the Fallen faction. The Harvester is a proper tank unit. They cost 500 and they wield a scythe, but they come with very high health, especially for the cost. And they're overall quite a good tank, especially for the price. And that scythe can do some surprising damage, especially if you have more than one Harvester. And since it's so big, it can hit more than one target at a time. However, the Harvester themselves is quite slow, which also makes them very vulnerable to ranged fire since they can't walk up and smack the ranged attackers in the face. Next we have the Wheelbarrow, which speed-wise is the complete opposite to the Harvester. It is really, really fast. It has a cost of 1,000, twice a Harvester, and it has 3 subunits in it. You can see the Traveler in the back with the absolute Chad chin and the Bob Ross-esque haircut. Then we have the Apple Thrower with the beard, and then we have a Farmer. 3 bros just chilling out on the Wheelbarrow. The Wheelbarrow itself has quite high health, but if the Wheelbarrow is destroyed, then the 3 units just get up and start smacking and stabbing nearby people. Pros, as mentioned, very fast, about 3 times the speed of a normal unit. Very good disrupting enemy formations, because what the Wheelbarrow loves to do is just drive forwards into formations, and due to the high health, it can actually survive long enough to mess up enemy formations quite well. However, if the Traveler accidentally turns too steeply or quickly, and the Wheelbarrow tips over, it's considered destroyed. And it is quite expensive, so you're going to need to justify that expense of 1,000. Also, considering that it is 1,000, the subunits are a little lackluster in terms of their capabilities. All of them are roughly as strong as a normal farmer, maybe a bit stronger. But 3 farmers is only 240, so it's not even a quarter price. Lastly, we have the Scarecrow, the quote-unquote boss unit for the Farmer faction. Now, of all the factions, this boss unit feels the least like a boss, but it's still quite justifiably a boss type unit. Has a cost of 1,200 and it throws crows. It does have very, very low health. A single spear will probably kill it, but it has very long range, and while it doesn't look it, I would classify it as a sort of artillery-esque unit, which, as I mentioned in my last faction, is really good at taking down big, slow, tanky targets like mammoths, harvesters, etc. So he will throw 3 crows per arm every 12 seconds, so you're getting roughly 1 crow every 2 seconds on average. Pros? Long range. The crows do really high damage, actually. Each one can probably one-shot a clubber or a protector. And the crows do seek out targets, but they can only hit 1 target apiece. Cons: it is quite slow, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be fast since it's just going to sit in the back of your army. Very low health, as I mentioned. Make sure no random spear thrower or stoner or whatever locks onto him. And the crow can actually be killed before reaching a target. However, since they're so small, it's quite hard to hit them. So overall, the farmer faction, the units do tend to have health on the lower end for their price, except for the harvester. So a good thing to do is to use the harvester and maybe the hay baler to protect your other units, while your remaining units, like your potion seller or your scarecrow, does the damage. If you do use your scarecrow, keep him safe at all cost. Make sure he has something to guard him. And I will say this now before you make this mistake: don't try to pair potion sellers with swarms of friendly hay balers or farmers. You're probably just going to get half your own army drunk, and it's going to render them horrendously ineffective in combat. In fact, you're probably just going to get yourself drunk. So that has been the analysis of the farmer faction. Thank you everybody for tuning in and for watching this whole video through. In the comments, I would like you to vote what faction should be next: the medieval faction, the ancient faction, or the Viking faction. The most liked comment will be the one that I choose for the next video. As always, have a good day.